Hi, I'm Carl Weber. Welcome to Video Aided Instructions English Grammar Series. This is the sentence structure program. You know, language is one of the most complicated human behaviors. Virtually every human being learns to use language by the time they're 2 or 3 years old. And everyone uses language every day in one way or another, either in speaking, in reading, or in writing. Therefore, everyone influences how language is used. They influence how language is spoken, heard, written, and understood. Therefore, the study of language is one of the most complicated of all subjects, and almost any grammar rule or rule about how to use language correctly is bound to have exceptions. In this program, we'll focus on the least you need to know. In other words, we'll try to take the complicated subject of grammar and make it easy for you. What we want to do is provide you with the rules and information that you need to communicate in English clearly, effectively, and correctly. Everyone is able to convey their meaning eventually. No one has ever starved to death because they weren't able to convey the fact that they were hungry. But some forms of language are more likely to please, to impress, and to influence other people. And therefore, using correct grammar and being able to express yourself properly is going to be more effective in your everyday life. It's a little bit like using proper table manners or dressing appropriately. It's not strictly necessary, but it's a very good idea. In addition, knowing and using the proper rules of English grammar will enable you to score higher on tests of English and to do better in school. So for all these reasons, studying and learning the basics of English grammar is also very important for anyone who is studying English as a second language. With that in mind, let's begin this program dealing with sentence structure. Let's begin by discussing what is a sentence. A sentence is a group of words that expresses a complete thought. You can contrast a sentence with a sentence fragment. A sentence fragment is a kind of mistake that people sometimes make in writing English. A sentence fragment is a group of words that doesn't express a complete thought. Now, sentence fragments are often used when people are casually speaking to one another, but a sentence fragment is considered a mistake in writing. Here's the reason. A sentence fragment, a group of words that doesn't express a complete thought by itself, may be clear in a conversation because people are talking back and forth, and this context gives meaning to the sentence fragment. In writing, however, there is no conversation to give a context and therefore to explain the meaning of the sentence fragment. So a sentence fragment which might be clear in conversation is not clear in writing. That's why when you're writing English, you want to write in complete sentences, not in sentence fragments. Consider, for example, this group of words. Out to lunch. Is this a sentence or a sentence fragment? Well, it's a sentence fragment because it doesn't express a complete thought. Out to lunch doesn't tell us who is out to lunch or explain what the meaning of those words out to lunch really is. The words out to lunch could become part of a complete sentence, of course. You could say, Susan and I are going out to lunch. Or, Frank was out to lunch when I visited his office. Now we have a complete thought, and therefore a complete sentence. But by themselves, the words out to lunch are a fragment rather than a complete sentence. Or consider these words. Maybe later. Is this a sentence or a sentence fragment? Again, it's a sentence fragment. The words maybe later by themselves don't express a complete thought. Now you could imagine having a conversation in which someone would say, maybe later, in answer to a question. In a conversation, a sentence fragment like this can be meaningful and can be understood. For example, you might say to someone, oh, do you feel like having a bite of lunch right now? And your friend might answer, maybe later. In the context of the conversation, you can understand what the sentence fragment means. But if the words maybe later appeared by themselves in a piece of writing, You probably wouldn't understand what the words were referring to. That's what makes it a sentence fragment and therefore incorrect in writing. So writing in English must consist of complete sentences. In writing, a sentence always begins with a capital letter. That's one of the larger letters that stands out on the page and indicates in English the beginning of a sentence. A sentence always ends with a punctuation mark, and there are a few different choices for punctuation marks that you can use to end a sentence. The most common punctuation mark to use to end a sentence is a period. The alternative choices are a question mark or an exclamation point. In a moment, we'll explain exactly how you would decide whether to use a period, a question mark, or an exclamation point to mark the end of a sentence. But in any case, the punctuation mark is necessary at the end of the sentence because it makes it easy for the reader to see when one sentence ends and the next one begins. Now, in English, there are four main kinds of sentences: declarative sentences, interrogative sentences, exclamatory sentences, and imperative sentences. Let's define each one and look at an example. A declarative sentence states a fact. Take a look at this example. The sun is shining today. This sentence states a fact about what today's weather is like. Therefore, it's a declarative sentence. The vast majority of English sentences that you'll encounter in reading and writing are declarative sentences. Notice that this sentence begins with a capital letter and ends with a period. Almost all declarative sentences end with periods. And again, this is the most common type of sentence that you're likely to encounter or that you'll be writing for school or for work. An interrogative sentence asks a question. Here's an example. Do you have any plans for this afternoon? When I say this interrogative sentence, I'm asking a question of whoever is listening to me. I'm asking them what they're planning to do this afternoon. An interrogative sentence ends with a question mark. That makes it clear to the reader that a question is being asked. And again, like all sentences, it begins with a capital letter. The third type of sentence is an exclamatory sentence. An exclamatory sentence expresses a strong emotion. Look at this example. What a beautiful day for a picnic. Maybe you could tell from the way I read that sentence aloud that I'm expressing a strong emotion or a strong feeling about what beautiful weather we have today. This makes it an exclamatory sentence, and it ends with an exclamation point. This is a special mark of punctuation that's used to indicate to the reader that strong emotions or feelings are being expressed in the sentence. The fourth type of sentence is an imperative sentence. An imperative sentence makes a request or gives an order. The person who hears an imperative sentence is being required to do something. Look at this example. Come with me. This is an imperative sentence because I'm inviting the person who hears the sentence to do something, namely, to come with me. An imperative sentence may end with a period or with an exclamation point. It all depends on how forceful the request or command or order is intended to be. A command or order which is given with a great deal of emotion and feeling and forcefulness might be ended with an exclamation point. Otherwise, a period will do. In this example, we've used an exclamation point to indicate that strong feelings are behind the invitation, come with me. These then are the four types of sentences: a declarative sentence, an interrogative sentence, an exclamatory sentence, and an imperative sentence. In most writing, declarative sentences are by far the most common. Interrogative sentences come second most frequent, and exclamatory and imperative sentences are very, very rare in writing. They're often used in speaking and conversation, but rarely in writing. So for the purposes of English grammar, as it affects your work and school use of English, The declarative and interrogative sentences are the most important. In your study guide, we've provided you with some exercises which will help to reinforce and allow you to practice the information and skills that we're covering in this program. Turn to your study guide now and go to the first exercise there, which deals with this topic of what is a sentence and the 4 types of sentences. Did you find this exercise difficult? Your job was to read 5 sentences, and for each one to decide whether the sentence was a declarative sentence, an interrogative sentence, an exclamatory sentence, or an imperative sentence. We also threw in 1 sentence fragment, that is, a group of words that looks like a sentence but doesn't express a complete thought. Remember that in writing, a sentence fragment is incorrect. Let's look at the first sentence. When will tomorrow morning's band rehearsal begin? Perhaps you can tell by reading this sentence that it is asking a question. Therefore, this is an interrogative sentence, and it needs to end with a question mark. So that's the correct answer for this first question. Let's look at the second sentence. Always read the safety instructions before using a new power tool. What kind of sentence is this? Is it a declarative sentence? Does it state a fact? No, not really. Is it an interrogative sentence? Is it asking a question of you, the hearer? No, it isn't. Is it an exclamatory sentence? Is it expressing strong emotion? No, not really that either. It is an imperative sentence. Remember, an imperative sentence is one that makes a request or gives an order. And in this case, the sentence is giving an order or making a request of whoever reads it. It is telling that person that they ought to do something, namely to read the safety instructions before using a new power tool. Therefore, this is an imperative sentence. Remember that we said an imperative sentence may end with either a period or an exclamation point. It all depends on whether strong feeling or strong emotion is being expressed. In this case, no particularly strong emotion is being expressed, and therefore the correct way to end this sentence would be with a period. Let's look at our next example. Having spent over 2 hours working on her dance routine. Could you tell that this is the sentence fragment? This is a sentence fragment because it doesn't express a complete thought. There are a lot of words here, and we can see that someone spent over 2 hours working on her dance routine, but we can't really tell what's going on because it doesn't say who spent 2 hours on her dance routine. Therefore, the person who is doing the action is missing from this sentence, and what results is not a complete thought. We don't really understand what the person who wrote this sentence is trying to convey. This is a sentence fragment, not a complete sentence, and if it appeared in a piece of writing, it would be considered incorrect. Therefore, this is the sentence fragment and shouldn't be given any final punctuation because it's really not a complete sentence. Let's look at the next example. The local wildlife refuge is home to over 70 species of birds. This sentence states a fact. Therefore, it's a declarative sentence, the most common type of sentence in English, and it ought to be concluded with a simple period. Let's look at the final sentence. That was a fabulous party. Here is a sentence that expresses strong emotion. This is an exclamatory sentence. It ought to be marked with an exclamation point, which indicates that it's a sentence expressing strong feelings. The person who wrote or speaks this sentence is talking about how much they enjoyed the party and is expressing that with a lot of feeling. That's what makes this an exclamatory sentence and means that it should end with an exclamation point. Did you get all 5 of these questions right? I hope so. Now we're ready to move on to Lesson 2. Now we know what a sentence is, and we also know what the 4 basic kinds of sentences are. But let's take a step back. Remember that the topic for this program is sentence structure. Now, structure refers to the way anything is constructed or built or made. For example, a house is a structure that's made out of wood, bricks, and other materials. What is a sentence constructed from? Well, of course, the most basic unit is the word. But before we talk about individual words, we need to talk about some of the bigger parts that go to make up the structure of a sentence. In particular, there are two big parts into which most sentences can be divided. These two main parts are the subject and the predicate. Let's talk about each in a little more detail. The subject tells what the sentence is talking about. Now, the subject of a sentence may be only one word long, or it may include a number of words. In any case, the single most important word in the subject is the simple subject. The other words in the subject are there to give more information about the simple subject. And we'll see an example in a moment. The subject, then, is one part of the sentence, and the rest of the sentence, whatever is not part of the subject, is considered part of the predicate, which is the other main building block of a sentence. The predicate describes something that the subject is or does. The most important word in the predicate is called the verb. A verb is a word that expresses action or state of being. So we now have two main parts to the sentence. We have the subject, which names what the sentence is talking about, and the predicate, which tells what the subject is or does. Once again, within the predicate, there is one most important word to focus on, which is called the verb, and all the other words that are in the predicate are there to give more information about what the subject does. Let's take a look at a couple of examples of sentences and see how they can be divided into subject and predicate. Look at this example. My younger sister Ingrid once worked as a costume designer. Let's begin by looking for the subject of this sentence. Is there a word or a group of words that explains what the sentence is talking about? Yes, in this case, the first four words of the sentence make up the subject. Those four words tell us what the sentence is about. The sentence is about my younger sister Ingrid. Is there one word within that subject which is the most important word, the word that tells you specifically what the sentence is about? Yes, it's the last word, Ingrid. So Ingrid is the simple subject of this sentence. The other words in the subject are there to give more information about the simple subject. So the words my younger sister are there to give more information about Ingrid. They tell us a little bit more about who Ingrid is. Okay, if the first four words of this sentence are the subject, then the rest of the sentence must be the predicate. Remember that the predicate describes something that the subject is or does. Do the other words in this sentence describe something that Ingrid is or does? Yes, they describe something that Ingrid did at one time. Once worked as a costume designer. All of that is the predicate of the sentence. Notice how the subject and the predicate work together to express a complete thought. Either one by itself would be a sentence fragment. My younger sister Ingrid couldn't stand alone as a sentence. That's a sentence fragment. It doesn't express a complete thought. Once worked as a costume designer would also be a sentence fragment. Those words also don't express a complete thought by themselves. But when you combine the subject and the predicate, a complete thought is expressed. Now, is there one most important word in the predicate that tells exactly what Ingrid does, or in this case, did, because it's talking about something from the past? Yes, there is one word that is most important in the predicate. It's the word worked. Worked is the verb in this sentence, and it's the most important word. It tells us exactly what Ingrid did. She worked. Notice that all the other words in the predicate give us more information about what Ingrid did. The word once, for example, tells us when she did it, at one time in the past. And the words as a costume designer give us more information about exactly how she worked, what kind of job she worked at. So all the other words in the predicate are there to give us more information about what Ingrid did. But the word worked is the most important word. It's the verb. So the heart of this sentence is the subject and the predicate, and in particular, the one-word simple subject and the verb. Ingrid worked. And all the other words in the subject and the predicate are there to give us more information about how and when and at what Ingrid worked. Let's take a look at another example. She enjoys creating things with her hands. Can you identify the subject in this sentence? In this case, the subject is only one word long, she. That word all by itself tells us who or what the sentence is about. All the rest of the sentence is the predicate. It tells us what the subject is or does. The rest of the sentence, enjoys creating things with her hands, tells us something about what the subject does. The subject, she, one word long, and therefore the subject and the simple subject are exactly the same. Focusing on the predicate for a moment, is there one word there that's most important? The verb, which tells us exactly what the subject does. Yes, the verb, the most important word in the predicate, is enjoys. That tells us exactly what the subject, she, does. She enjoys. And the other words in the predicate tell us more information about what she enjoys. She enjoys creating things. And how does she create them? With her hands. So all the other words in the predicate give us more information about exactly what the subject does. But enjoys is the most important word in the predicate. It's the verb. Again, the heart of this sentence is she enjoys, and the other words, the remaining words in the predicate, are there to give more information. In this particular sentence, then, we have a very short subject, and the rest of the sentence, the predicate, tells us what the subject does. Now, occasionally, this kind of simple sentence structure gets a little more complicated with the addition of a compound subject. What is a compound subject? A compound subject is two or more things that work together as the subject. Usually, these two or more things are joined together by the word and or the word or. Look at this example. Dogs and cats sometimes enjoy living together. What's the subject of this sentence? Well, the subject of this sentence is the first three words, dogs and cats. That's what the sentence is about. All the rest is the predicate. It tells what dogs and cats do. Now, what's the simple subject of this sentence? Is it dogs? Is it cats? Well, really, it's both. The sentence isn't only about dogs, and it's not only about cats. It's about both. And since we have two subjects that are joined by the word and, we would consider this a compound subject. So the entire subject is both words and the word and between them. Dogs and cats all together go to make up the subject as well as the simple subject. In this case, a compound subject exists in this sentence. Looking for a moment at the predicate of this sentence, sometimes enjoy living together. Is there one most important word that expresses exactly what the dogs and cats do? The word is enjoy. That's the verb in this sentence, the most important word in the predicate, and it tells us what the dogs and cats do. They enjoy. And the other words in the predicate tell us more about exactly what they enjoy. They enjoy living together. And when they do it, sometimes. Just as a subject can be compound, a verb can also be compound. When a subject is compound, it means that there are two or more things that are acting together in the sentence. Can you guess what a compound verb would be? Well, that's when you have a subject which is doing two or more things. A compound verb is two or more verbs that describe what the subject does. Again, joined by the word and or. Here's an example. The giant tree bent and swayed in the wind. What's the subject in this sentence? The answer is the giant tree. That's what the sentence is about. Is there a one-word simple subject? Yes, it's the word tree. The other words, the giant, are there to tell you more about the tree, to describe it a little bit. Now, the rest of the sentence is the predicate, bent and swayed in the wind. Now, is there a most important word in the predicate? A word that tells you exactly what the tree did? Well, the fact is, there are two words that tell you two things that the tree did. It bent, but it also swayed. So those two words, bent and swayed, are both equally important. They're both verbs. They both describe actions that the tree took, and they're connected by the word and. So in this sentence, we have a compound verb. That is, two verbs joined by the word and, both of which describe what the subject is doing. So the heart of this sentence is tree bent and swayed. And the other words in the sentence are there to give us more information about what kind of tree it was and how and when the tree bent and swayed. So as we see, in some sentences, you may have a compound subject, that is, two or more subjects joined by the word and or. And in some sentences, you may have a compound verb, that is, two or more verbs joined by the word and or. You may even have, in certain sentences, both a compound subject and a compound verb. But most often, one or the other will be compound and not both. We've seen then that every sentence can be broken down into two main parts, the subject and the predicate. The subject expresses who or what the sentence is about, and one word from the subject, the simple subject, is the most important word in the subject. The rest of the sentence is the predicate. It tells what the subject is or does, and the most important word in the predicate is the verb. In your study guide, we have an exercise that will give you a chance to practice your understanding of these concepts. In this exercise, your job was to look at each sentence and decide which group of words was the subject and which group of words was the predicate. Then within the subject, you were to identify the most important word, which is the simple subject, and within the predicate, to identify the most important word, which would be the verb. Let's take a look at each of the sentences and see how well you did. First, 53 officers received medals at the police department awards ceremony. What's the subject of this sentence? Who or what is the sentence about? It's the first two words, 53 officers. That is who this sentence is about. And the simple subject, the most important word here, is officers. The other word, 53, gives us more information about the officers. Specifically, it tells us how many officers there were. So 53 officers is the subject, and officers is the simple subject. That means the rest of the sentence would be the predicate. Were you able to identify the single most important word, namely the verb? That's the word that expresses the action that the officers did. The answer to that is received. Received is the verb in this sentence. It tells us what the officers did. They received something. All the rest of the predicate gives us more information about what the officers did. What did they receive? Medals. Where did they receive them? At the police department awards ceremony. So all those other words in the predicate are there to give us more information about the action they did, namely the receiving. Let's take a look at the second sentence. Bored with the grown-up conversation, little Amy fell asleep under the kitchen table. Where would you divide this sentence between the subject and the predicate? In this case, the subject includes all the words up to little Amy. So the subject would include bored with the grown-up conversation, little Amy. All of that is the subject. All of that describes what the sentence is about, or in this case, who the sentence is about. What's the single most important word here? Did you identify one word as the simple subject? The answer is Amy. Amy is the simple subject. That's basically what the sentence is about. All the other words here give us more information about Amy. The other words tell us that Amy is little and that she was bored with the grown-up conversation. So all those other words give more information about the simple subject, Amy. The rest of the sentence is the predicate. Fell asleep under the kitchen table. Which word is the verb, the most important word in the predicate? The answer is fell. What did Amy do? She fell. The rest of the words in the predicate give us more information, specifically that she didn't fall off a ledge or off a sofa. She fell asleep. And where did she fall asleep? Under the kitchen table. So the subject is bored with the grown-up conversation, little Amy, and the predicate is fell asleep under the kitchen table. And fell is the most important word in the predicate, the verb. How about the next example? The number of businesses in this county has increased every year for the past decade. The subject of this sentence is the number of businesses in this county. All of those words go to explain what the sentence is about. Now, picking the simple subject in this sentence isn't so easy. It's a little bit tricky in this case. Is the sentence about businesses or this county? No, it's really about number. The word number is actually the simple subject of this sentence. One way to tell for sure is that that word, that simple subject, is the word that is most directly connected to the predicate. Let's look at the predicate. The predicate is the rest of the sentence, which says, has increased every year for the past decade. Now remember, the predicate tells us what the subject of the sentence does. Now, looking at this sentence, what has increased every year for the past decade? In other words, what does the predicate refer to? What is it that has increased every year for the past decade? Is it the county that has increased? No, the county hasn't increased. Is it businesses has increased? No, not really. What has increased is the number of businesses. In other words, the number was smaller at one time. Now the number is larger. Perhaps the number of businesses was 50. Now it's 100. The point is that the number has increased or gotten larger. So the simple subject here is the word number. It may be difficult to recognize because it's not at the end of the complete subject. It's somewhere buried in the middle, and it's easy to overlook that. But the most important word in this particular subject is the word number, and you can tell that because that's the word that's most directly connected to the predicate. Looking at the predicate, what's the most important word there, or the verb? Once again, this example is a little more tricky than some of the other examples we've seen.